Lesson 1-6, Day 2, Relations. Essential question. How do you determine the dependent and independent variables from a graph? The two new vocabularies are independent variable and dependent variable. The independent variable, we like to think of the independent variable as being the variable that is represented on the x-axis, and it's the variable that happens first. It happens first. A lot of times you have a choice. You have some choice with this variable. And then the second variable, which is represented on the y-axis, is called the dependent variable. And that variable depends on x. So it depends on the other variable. So it depends on the other variable. So for example, when you're graphing, you graph x first, the x-coordinate first, and then the y-coordinate. So your placement of your point on your graph is going to depend on where you went for x first before y. When you think about the word independent, you could think about how when you turn 18, you may be considered independent of your parents in some way. When you're younger than that, you are dependent on them. So when we read through problems, these can be very confusing. Make sure you ask for help if you are confused. The independent variable, though, does occur on the x-axis. It does happen first. And dependent is on the y-axis. So it's pretty straightforward when you're looking at a graph. Okay, now, we've got some words here. Identify the independent and dependent variables in each situation. I'm going to abbreviate I for independent and D for dependent. The first situation says, in gym, so in Phy-Ed class, the number of calories you burn increases as the number of pacers you do increases. We all love those pacers. So, what happens first? What happens first? Well, let's think about, I am going to do a little bit of highlighting here. Let's think about what our variables are that we're talking about. What are the two different things that we're talking about here? We're talking about calories. Oh, that didn't work very well to highlight. We'll undo that. Let's try again. Here we go. Highlighter. All right, so we're talking about calories, the calories you burn, and we're talking about the number of pacers that you do. What happens first? Do you burn the calories first, or do you do the pacers first? Obviously, you have to do the pacers first. So, first we do our pacers, and then the number of calories depends on how many pacers we did. So dependent, calories depend on the number of pacers we run. Okay, next one. It says sketch a graph to represent the situation. Remember to label the x and y axes. Okay, so my graph, I am just going to do a little sketch here. We just need one quadrant because you can't do a negative amount of pacers. So first what we are doing is we are doing the pacers. So pacers goes on our x-axis, and then the number of calories we burn is going to be dependent, so it is on the y-axis. Now, I am just going to draw a little tiny sketch, and I'm going to say that the more pacers you do, the more calories you're going to burn, so basically it's going to be going up. So the higher the number of pacers, the higher the number of calories. So that should make sense. As one goes up, the other one goes up with it. So that's my estimate. Next situation. Identify the independent and dependent variables again. The number of video stores has steadily decreased over time. Okay? So now I'm thinking that my variables here, the two things that we're talking about, is the number, one is the number of video stores, And the other one we're talking about is time. So what happens first? What happens first? The number of the video stores that we have or time? Well, when one of your variables is time is always going to be on the x-axis. Time is continuous. Think about when you make like a timeline for something, you typically draw a horizontal line, you start on the left, you move to the right, and you show what's happening over time. So my independent variable is going to be time, like the number of years, whatever year it is. Then the number of video stores depends on time. It depends on what year we are talking about. Because some of you may not even remember what video stores are anymore because so many of them are closed around here. We have Redbox, we have Netflix, we have, tons of different ways that we watch movies. We don't typically go to video stores anymore. So that's something that has changed over time. My sketch is going to show you that if I put time on my x-axis and the number of video stores on the y-axis, what happened with the number of video stores, and again, you might not be aware of this, but the number of video stores has steadily decreased. And I'm curving it just because I don't think it's gone down to 0, but it has really rapidly decreased. So there was a time when it increased. So I guess another kind of graph would work. A graph where the number of video stores increased and then it decreased. That would work also. It just depends on what years you're talking about down here on your axis. If you're talking about starting your graph when there were no video stores, or starting your graph, like I did initially where I was starting it at the peak and then I was just saying that it had decreased over time. Okay, third example, word problems. Independent, dependent. The 8th grade teachers are selling Cougar cards to students. The more Cougar cards they sell, the more money they will make to purchase U-Rock treats. Sketch a graph to represent the situation. Remember to label the x and y axes. Okay, so the 8th grade teachers, my highlighter, they're selling some sort of cards. So, Cougar cards. And the more cards they sell, the more money they'll make. To purchase treats for students. So, what's happening first? First, are they getting the money? Or first, are they selling the cards? First, they're selling the cards. So, I am going to put independent. Oh, I don't need the highlighter there. Okay, so my independent is going to be the Cougar cards. Sold. And dependent is going to be the amount of money earned. On my graph, again, independent goes on the x-axis. So, Cougar cards sold. And then on my y-axis, money earned. All like earning money. And this one, very similar to our first example, the more you sell, the more you earn. So it's just going to be going up, increasing. All right, now we would like you to create your own situation to describe this graph. I want you to really think about the different pieces in the graph. The first piece where it goes up, second piece it goes down, third piece it's going up again, fourth piece it's going down, and the fifth piece it's going up. So I want you to really think about a situation, and it says label me, so we want axis labels. A title would be great too. So I want you to think about, in your own words, writing a paragraph that could describe a situation represented by this graph. And be creative. Next, another one where you have to make up your own situation. This one has only 3 pieces, and I want you to really focus on what this piece right here represents when it's horizontal. What would that represent? So based on what you choose to label your X and Y axis with, make sure that it makes sense that you would have this flat section of your graph. And if you're confused about what that flat section would represent, please make sure that you ask about it in class if you don't understand that. There's a couple different things that it can represent. It just depends on the situation that you create and whether or not it makes sense. Okay, the next kind of an example. This one gives you a graph, and it says identify the independent and dependent variables from the graph. Well, we've been talking about it quite a bit. Independent is on the x-axis, so that is time in days. And then dependent is on the y-axis, so that's height in inches. It's important that you identify what your time is being measured in, whether it's days, weeks, months, years. Same with your height. Is it inches, feet, meters, centimeters? So those labels are very important. Next it says explain what point A represents. So point A is the star right here, this star. Now if I look at what it represents, I see that the ordered pair for A would be 5 and then 25. So A is represented by 5, 25. Well, that 5 is days. So it means, so point A means we've got 5 days and we've got 25 inches. So it means that the height is 25 inches after 5 days. So it's very important that you understand what is represented by that point. It's not just 5, 25, 5 what? 25 what? So 25 inches after 5 days. The next one, very similar, says to explain what point C represents. So point C looks like 15 and then 75. So C means that the height is 75 inches after 15 days. If there was a title on this graph, we would know exactly what they're talking about, the height of what. So you can kind of you could make something up on your own, but it doesn't tell us with the title on this. The next example is just like that, so I think you've got the hang of it. Point B, B looks like 1050, so after 10 days, the height is 50 inches. Point D looks like after 20 days, the height is 100 inches. And then independent and dependent, remember independent is always the x-axis, so time in days, and dependent, height in inches. Now it's time to write your summary. This should be pretty easy because I've said it a lot of times. When looking at a graph, the independent variable is blank and the dependent variable is blank. The key was when looking at a graph. When looking at a graph. Okay? Describe how you can figure out which variable is which. Complete sentence, please. And here's your homework assignment for the rest of lesson 1-6.